So, hey everyone, welcome to this week's Tech Talk. The Tech Talks are a series run by the University of Idaho Libraries, goodness gracious, Data Hub, in an attempt to connect researchers and UI community members with tools and topics, and really anything that can help them do their research in the sort of information digital technological age we live in now. So to that end, this week we have Jeremy Kenyon, a research librarian here at the library, and he is going to talk about some off-the-shelf AI tools that bill themselves as being helpful to researchers, and will give sort of a pros and cons evaluation of them. So, Jeremy.
All right, thank you. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks people online for being here as well. As Norm said, my name is Jeremy Kenyon. I've been here at the library for about 15 years. I work primarily with natural resources, but I also work in this area, the Data Hub, and hopefully we're getting a little more prepared for helping folks on questions associated with AI. So that was kind of the impetus for getting into today's topic. AI tools for working with research literature. I selected a couple of tools that are somewhat prominent, somewhat well known. There's other tools out there in the space. They're going to be different in different ways. And so this is kind of the first draft of this sort of talk, and we'll see kind of how it goes together. What I'm going to do is kind of talk a little bit about the tools, and then we're just going to demo them and go into them and look at kind of how they work. And if you have any questions at all, please just ask, and we'll do what we can to answer them. And so, yeah, we're just going to go through all three and then have a bit of a Q&A at the end if people have other questions. But something I didn't put on there, but I want to start with, is just the concept of search in the context of AI, because the tools that we're going to be talking about today are particularly AI-oriented because of what they're doing with semantic search specifically, and how that's differentiated from lexical or keyword searching in the past. There are some other aspects. They employ ChatGPT as a sort of co-pilot. We'll look at that in a little bit. That's kind of a different concept altogether. But I just wanted to focus on this topic for a second. I will say there's some very, very good technical deep dives that Director of Research Computing Luke Sheneman has done on a variety of these topics as part of our series. And so those are either up on the library's YouTube already, or there will be soon. So they go into far more detail about exactly how this technology works, more than I'm going to go into it today. But I basically just wanted to iterate that most library databases that we deal with, most search engines that we deal with the exception of some like Google, which have their own sort of special sauce under the hood, are dealing with sort of lexical and keyword searching as the mechanism for retrieving documents that you're interested in, and trying to match those to the terms that you're entering into the search. So you're putting in your keywords, you're perhaps using Boolean logic and or not, things like that. And they're basically using a probability-based approach to figure out whether or not those documents are relevant to what you're searching for. And so it's a fairly simple concept. I use a little bit of an example there with, the terms like lightsaber, Jedi, Star Wars. Are all those going to retrieve the same sets of documents if you use those keywords? And the answer is depending on the frequency of those terms showing up in those documents. Semantic search kind of goes a whole different direction, and the two graphs are part of that, what you're seeing there. And so in semantic search, we're talking about using newer natural language processing techniques. So starting in about 2018 with the Attention is All You Need paper, that kind of transformed the way natural language processing is really handled large amounts of text. And so instead of just looking at these kind of probabilistic ways of figuring out whether something is related to something, they do a lot of pre-processing on large amounts of text in order to generate these big vector databases, basically, of things called word embeddings. So word embeddings are essentially just numeric strings, vectors, that say kind of, this is what this word means, this is its relationship to other words, this is how it fits into the sort of lexicon of our language. And so as you can see in the picture there, it'll pre-process a bunch of documents dealing with dogs, a bunch of documents dealing with text, or sorry, with cats, and then it'll end up grouping those using those word embeddings in kind of similar directions in vector space. And then down below, they can use that kind of calculation to figure out, does your query relate more to one of these groupings than the other? And so that way they can actually figure out, is the thing you're searching for related to this group, regardless of whether or not they're using specific terms or not. And so using that kind of a technique, we can ideally select documents in a search that are more relevant to the kinds of meaning and context of your query, as opposed to which terms you're specifically using in that query. So typically in a semantic search environment, we'll see that here in a second with these systems, you're usually posing kind of longer queries or questions or things like that. And it does a pretty good job of figuring out kind of what documents in its database should be related to that. So as I said before, much more technical deep dive in some of the talks that Luke gave in this series before. So I'm going to just jump into each of these three. I'm going to start with ResearchRabbit. And so ResearchRabbit is a website that bills itself as a discovery tool, a way to find literature based on the relationships between different papers and documents. To be blunt, the AI aspect of ResearchRabbit is a little unclear. In each of these cases, exactly how they're using AI is not always really spelled out very effectively. You had to do some digging to find some of this. They do use Semantic Scholar, which is a website out of the Allen Institute for AI up at the University of Washington, and PubMed as their underlying search tools. And Semantic Scholar does have its own transformer-based model called Spectre 2, which I have a little bit of a graph there, or a graphic sort of detailing how it works. It's kind of what we just talked about in terms of using word embeddings to classify or find similarity between different kinds of items in a set. And so it's kind of piggybacking on what Semantic Scholar is doing, but the actual interface isn't doing a lot of AI work by itself. Results are then returned to the interface, and then you can kind of explore, visualize, and work with them. So it's a pretty simple concept and pretty easy to use. The one thing you need to make sure you do is get an account with all three of these. In order to actually use them effectively, you have to be able to log in and use them. And then you have to add at least one publication with this instance or with this system to be able to use it. So let's just jump to the actual demo here. There we go. So ResearchRabbit.ai is the website. And then when you log in, you end up seeing something that looks kind of like this. You can create collections. You can create categories. I hope this is big enough for you guys to see here. Does that help a little bit?
You can pull chairs closer if you need. Feel free.
Yeah. You can create collections. You can categorize collections into different groups. So I have one here called environmental information. And then I created a collection pretty simply as you need to or as you want to. So you can also connect this to your Zotero account. So Zotero, if you're not familiar with it, is a research manager, reference manager. So it's a way to collect your papers and to organize them. And so this is looking at mine, and at any point I could drop all of these Zotero collections into ResearchRabbit if I really wanted to. I don't right now. But that's a way to get papers in there. A secondary way to add papers is you just go to this Add Papers section. So once we've created our collection, we can tell what we want. And I know there's a paper from McNee called Reconciling the Supply and Demand of Information. And so it gives you either the PubMed search or a Semantic Scholar search, depending on what you're interested in. We'll select Semantic Scholar here. And hopefully we can find the paper again. Add a little bit more here.
So what is the sort of subject coverage of Semantic Scholar? Are there particular disciplines that it covers better or worse than others?
It's very strong in computer science and engineering and the STEM fields more broadly, and then it kind of covers other things as it goes. So yeah, I think Semantic Scholar started by like piggybacking on a lot of the open databases, the Microsoft Academic Graph before it went away. This is taking its time, isn't it? And so it's got a pretty wide range. It's an impressive tool generally. That works. If I don't get it, we'll just go with the paper that we have in there already.
Not the best start to ResearchRabbit's showing as
Yeah.
a useful tool.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure. Yeah, I had no problem with it before. So anyway, I added this other paper, Foundations of Translational Ecology. And this is essentially the workflow of using ResearchRabbit. You select the paper that you have in mind. You can click out to actually go look at the paper if you wanted to. It does depend on your institutional access. So if you're working in the U of I environment, many of these papers should be available, though not all. And then over on the left, you'll see the semantic search actually comes into play with the similar work option here. So do you want to find papers that are similar to this one? And then you have traditional citation searching here. You can look at its references. You can look at papers that have cited it, and really just kind of work through all the sort of network of kind of associated papers that have been produced. You can also look at the authors. This particular paper had a huge number of authors, so there's like a wide range. So we can do a bit of a sociological search here and kind of work through groups and sort of invisible colleges of individuals. So if we click on them, we can go to their published work, we can look at their collaborators, and so on. And so it's really a process of discovering what literature is out there, finding it, and then creating kind of a collection of papers. Yeah.
Does it only have journal articles? Or does it have books?
It is mostly journal articles, but it does have book content in it, book chapters, things like that. Yeah. Semantic Scholar is a little bit of a broader database in that respect. Yeah, so if we'll go back here and click on similar work. And so it found a number of papers it says is similar to this one. So developing a translational ecology workforce, for example. We can sort it in a variety of ways. We can look at the most recent numbers of citations, things like that. We can add comments as we're going to some of these. And over here on the graph image, we can work our way using this graph to look at papers, or we can adjust it and set it up as a timeline, which I think is kind of a neat concept. So it arranges the graph sort of chronologically, so you can kind of look at that relationship over time. And of course, we can filter these, in some way if we wanted to as well. So in this case, I'm filtering by that author inquest there. And you can export this graph as a image file if you wanted to. I don't think you can export it as an actual graph file, which might be interesting for other reasons. But when you find something that you're interested in, you can go ahead and then just add that back to your original collection. And then over time, as you're collecting more and more work, you end up forming, if we go over to the left here, a sort of larger and larger collection in our original grouping. And then whenever we're ready, we can go ahead and just select all that and export it to our reference manager. We can export it in BibTeX. We can do whatever we want. Remember, this is just a discovery tool to help us find literature. So that's usually the output that we're looking for at this stage, is we just want to list things. So again, I think the AI part of this is a little overblown, but I do think that the similar work seems to work pretty effectively for finding things that are related and appropriate. I know a little bit about this particular field, and these are the kinds of things I would expect to see coming up in this kind of a search. Any questions about this one?
is it, if you collect multiple papers, is it taking the similar work from one individual paper you have selected, or are both of those papers selected right there, and it's sort of combining them and trying to find things that are similar to both of them?
I believe in this case, it's trying to find based on the two of them grouped.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the more you collect, the better it might get.
In theory, yeah.
Or worse, it could get noisier.
Could do that, yeah. Yeah, there are some sort of sharing capabilities as well. So you can invite collaborators. You can make this a public thing that people can see and look at if you wanted to. Some options like that. But I think you can also export this to Zotero and be able to show it through there as well. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Okay. We can come back to this if anybody has any other questions about it. The other tools, Scispace and Elicit, I think are going to be a lot more compelling from the sort of AI perspective. And so we'll look at each one in turn here. Scispace is previously known as Typeset. And so the URL actually at the moment is typeset.io. And they actually have a series of other tools I'm not going to talk about today that are focused on journal submissions and templating and trying to do trying to give you a full-fledged workflow from kind of research all the way through, or research discovery all the way through, like submitting a journal manuscript to a publisher. Scispace is also one of the only tools that I see really engaging with the academic publishing community. So interestingly, they seem to be more in conversation with academic publishers and some of the other tools. Elicit seems to be off in its own little world, doing its own thing, but it is kind of interesting. They heavily relied on ChatGPT or GPT-3 to do a lot of their work, although they do have their own corpus of publications. So instead of relying on Semantic Scholar for their work, they actually generated their own based on, there's a variety of open tools out there for creating these corpuses, as well as working with publishers, I think. And then, as we'll see as we get into it, they actually incorporate that Copilot, is what they call it in their system, AI interface for chatting with papers or interrogating papers and things like that. So we'll take a look at that here. Again, you need to create an account. There is a premium subscription, and they do sort of lock certain features behind those, including some basic ones like exporting content. And so before you can really do too much work, you do have to actually sign up. And that's true of Elicit too, frankly. There's just aren't that many great free tools for doing this kind of work. And so anyway, there's four kind of main ways to interact. We'll look at the lit review. You can upload PDFs and sort of interrogate those PDFs using the Copilot AI. You can extract data, which I don't think is that impressive a tool. And then they've got a bunch of little smaller tools, which we won't really dig into too much. Citation generator, an AI detector, a paraphraser, which seems like it's, you know, a risky kind of thing. But there's a lot there to work with. They do also, as I said before, they seem to engage more with the academic community. And as a result, they do have a pricing model that's oriented towards labs and teams of researchers. So that's a little bit, maybe a bit of a savings there. But let's go ahead and take a look at this one too. So if we go to typeset.io, you can go to Scispace as well, and they'll just redirect you to this site. One of the things you want to do is log in. Let me make this bigger again. There we go. And so those four options I mentioned before are listed right there. As you upload content, you will build out your library. So I've uploaded a few papers here. You can see that they're loaded pretty much as I put them in with their terrible file names that don't mean anything, but they went ahead and did an automatic summarization of those papers and just put a little bit of information there so we can see. And this is a fairly common interface that you'll see also in Elicit, where you can add specific columns. or you can ask it for custom columns. So if there's this particular, if for example, you were looking at meta-analyses and you wanted to look at treatment effects or effect sizes, you could type in effect size as a column and it'll do its best to basically list for each paper what the effect size was in each of those papers. So you can do custom columns or use their built-in options as well. You can also import content from Zotero, as we saw in the last one. All of them seem to have that functionality. And then they've just started this notebook option, which we'll see a little bit more in Elicit. And in their case, it's kind of this just kind of a scratch pad here on the left that seems to be semi-markdown and somewhat its own kind of thing, where you can sort of take notes and save information as you go. So we're going to start here with the literature review function on Scispace. And, I asked it before, based on some research that I'm doing, can geoparsing effectively identify a study location in a research article? So based on the literature that's out there, can you answer that question? Can you give me some papers that answer that question? And this is what it does. So the first thing it does is it tries to give you kind of this overall summary of the answers are from the literature that it selected. It gave, in this case, 10 papers. We can orient this in different ways. We can say we only want open access, we want top tier papers. We can sort it in a variety of different ways, but in essence, it finds a bunch of papers using semantic search that it thinks are relevant to the question that you asked. It generates insights using GPT-3. And so these insights are going to be more or less the responses to my query. So as we get down here, we get some really specific statements like, yes, state-of-the-art neural network geoparsers show high performance in recognizing study locations, and so on and so forth. And so as you look through these papers, they seem relatively accurate to me. And they give you at least a quick way to sort of scan through whether these papers are appropriately addressing your question or not. And then they have their TLDR summary here that gives you kind of just a sense of what the paper's about. We can also add more columns here. I think this is rate limited a little bit by the pricing, but we can do the same thing we were talking about before. We can add their pre-built columns, or we can create some more depending on what we want to be able to look through all these papers. If you find one that you think is particularly useful, you can click on it. Just click on this one. And it takes you to their own kind of version of this set of tools operating against this single paper. And so as we go down, we can kind of see the paper itself. We can read it and look at it. We can look at the citations and references associated with it. We can also talk to the Copilot AI and ask it questions about this paper specifically. Whatever it is that we're interested in talking to it about. So they say they have a higher quality version of Copilot that's also feature locked behind the pay model. So can't tell you for now if that is really high quality or not. So there's lots of ways to interact with a given paper or work across literature. Let's see. I had Copilot set up for a paper earlier. It's this one. Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning, the attention is all you need paper was the sort of catalyst for sort of changing the way we're doing natural language processing. So here's an example of that paper using, and I'm looking at it using the Copilot model. And so if I look at some of these equations in here and I'm a little unclear as to exactly how to interpret them, I can actually just kind of paint this equation on the PDF. At least I could earlier. There we go. and then ask it to explain it. And it's going to go through the process of just basically extracting from the text exactly what that equation is doing and kind of laying it out in a different format, which may or may not be useful for me to understand exactly what it is I'm looking at. Still sort of depends on a basic understanding of this kind of stuff. So nonetheless, you do have some tools that you can use to help you be able to sort of interrogate these papers a little more and ask the questions as you want to. Any questions or anything so far? Okay. There are a couple of other tools in here, like the paraphraser, which I think is interesting if you're struggling with writing your own text in a particular way and you'd like it to suggest some other ways of saying the same thing. It's pretty useful. I think obviously this could be used in some not so great ways to rephrase text that you got from somewhere. But I do think for your own writing, if you just need some help, maybe thinking about how to explain something in a different way, it could be a useful tool to play with a little bit. We'll use a little example here. We'll ask it to go ahead and paraphrase for us, gives us some options, and we can make it short. We can say, let's make it really different if possible. And, work through that and see if you think that's a better solution. So I think there are probably a number of instances where you're working on something where this could be actually pretty useful. Like I said, there's some other tools here. I'm not going to go into them. The AI detector, the citation generator. There's a Chrome extension that you can use. So if you're looking at a new paper in Nature, you can highlight a section and ask it to sort of interrogate that and work with that a little bit. So there's some really cool tools that are worth exploring in Scispace. And I think you can do a lot without actually having to pay up to a point. Elicit is a little more restrictive in that sense, but this is a pretty good step in this direction. And while you could build these kinds of tools with open models and other things, in all honesty, they do a lot of the hard work for you here. And so it becomes a lot easier to use using something like this. All right. Well, let's pop over to the third one here, Elicit. So Elicit is another tool that operates kind of like Scispace does. They have a lot of similar ideas about what people want to do with literature and some of the pain points of working with it. They're riding on the Semantic Scholar corpus again because it's an open resource. Semantic Scholar has lots of different APIs, and so that's partly why they're all using Semantic Scholar. It looks like back in 2021 or so, they were using GPT-3 to do their work, but since then they've said they've moved to open source models. There's at least one really good one that I know of, Mixtral, and so maybe that's the one that they're not saying exactly what they use. So that could be the one they're doing, and they're also talking about using sort of other models as the feedback mechanisms for improving the models that they have. So the work that they're doing is interesting. They don't talk too much about exactly what's happening under the hood, but I think we can kind of intuit a certain amount from what we can see. Again, you want to create an account with Elicit. They use a kind of notebook model, so sort of like ChatGPT. When you go in, each time you have a conversation, you get sort of a thread, if you will. They kind of maintain things in a threaded system as well, called notebooks. And then, as we saw with the other tools, you can upload PDFs, you can import things through Zotero, different ways of interacting with it. And we'll look at some of the options there. The pricing model on Elicit is a little bit different than the other ones. It's a credit-based model, and so if you pay, you get a certain amount of credits per month that you can then run through, and so you'll keep getting credits month to month. If you're free user, you're going to run out of credits eventually. Although I've found If you stick around long enough, they'll send you free credits every once in a while. So maybe there's something to that. And then, like in Scispace, they lock down certain features behind the paid structure. So let's pop over to Elicit here. And so when you log in, this is what you see. Pretty simple. Let's pull this up a little bit. Design works very similar to Scispace. Over here, they're giving you kind of an impression of how much it's going to cost you to run these different functions. Uploaded some papers. The list of concepts is possibly the most expensive, but it's really kind of an interesting idea. So I'm just going to look at a couple of notebooks I went through before. So I ran partially because some of these take a minute or two to actually run it, and I didn't want to kind of bog us down with that. So looking at the list of concepts, I asked it, what are the most effective methods for communicating science to general audiences? So they went through a number of papers and then tried to, there we go, tried to give us kind of a list of topics based on the papers that they found as ways of communicating science. I don't know if I found their sort of solution here terribly interesting. Most of these are fairly generic, and it could have been my query too. And I will say, for all of these queries on Scispace, all the principles of prompt engineering apply here. And so, thinking about the way you're talking to the system can generate different results. And so, yeah, my queries here are pretty lame by that perspective. But I looked at this, and one of the things that Elicit does is it allows you then to go step by step through kind of different actions. So I asked it, what are a list of concepts based on papers? It gave me this 92 concept list. Then I said, okay, well, let's pick the first one, data visualization. And I said, how effective is data visualization for communicating science to the public? And I ran a basic literature review search. And so what it did is it did what it does. It went through and tried to find a bunch of papers associated with that topic, and then gave us some summarization information about that. And so I can go through and I can add columns, like I'll add methodology as a way of sort of organizing this and thinking about it. And so there it just added the sort of methods from each of the papers to the list. And I can kind of just work through that until I get to where I want to be. Again, they're exporting behind a paid tier. And so there's a sort of limitation on what you can do here without paying, but it at least lets you sort of dig through some of these papers and some of these techniques and see what you can find. And as you go, you can select papers and then run different kind of operations on those papers. So we can create a table from the selected papers. We can summarize abstracts, and then we can chat with the papers the same way we did with Copilot on the other system. And so all of these are kind of options that we have in front of us. I will say that I think that this model of the step-by-step approach seems to be really effective for kind of working through a research question as you want to go through all of these different kinds of phases of working through the research. But that pricing model can be a little bit of a challenge, I think, for working with this. Outside of that, I think their other activities are pretty standard. You can extract data from a paper. So if we picked this one, for example, their idea of extracting data is really just similar to what we've been seeing with all the other things. You can pull out the summary of the findings, the outcomes, and or you can create your own custom columns to be able to look at it. But in either case, I think kind of the takeaways from these tools are you're dealing with a very large corpus, so it's helping you to search quite a range of possible documents out there. It's giving you a pretty effective, and it seems like a fairly high quality summarization of those papers and organizing that into a structure that's pretty useful. And then I think after that, it's sort of up to you to really use these effectively with the chat option and the prompts that you've asked the paper or the system to give you. So yeah. So Elicit, Scispace, ResearchRabbit, all different ways of finding stuff and trying to use it effectively. Takes you a little bit away from sort of traditional searching, but I think it's an effective way of organizing and aggregating information. Pretty useful. So with that, I'll just kind of open it up to conversation and questions and ideas and anything else anybody has.
Poll in chat.
Okay.
While we're doing the Q&A, so feel free to ask all types of questions in the meantime. One question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that the chat with papers for these tools has value over using just ChatGPT itself?
I don't know that it does, given that they're largely just using GPT. And if you had something like GPT-4, if you subscribe to something like that, I think your experience would probably be superior. If these tools are upgraded to those kinds of things, I think it'll improve. I do think if you can chat against multiple papers, there may be something there that is particularly useful. But from what I understand, the difference between the latest models, Claude 3 and GPT-4, and what they're using here is significant enough. Your experience would be better using those.
And how do you find the relevance searches in these tools compared to something like Google Scholar?
I think generally it's pretty good. At least on the questions that I'm familiar with, like this geoparsing query, there's a number of papers in there that I would expect to see and did see. There were a number of papers in there I'd never seen before that actually seem really on point for some of the work that we're doing. So, yeah, I think it's pretty effective. I think one thing to remember is Google Scholar's corpus is broader. In part because it's collecting a lot of very sort of unusual gray literature. And so it has the ability to pull in some of that into a search that these systems don't necessarily have as part of theirs.
Anything else? Last call for questions? All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you everyone for coming to this Tech Talk.